Rawr.
Little ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Yeah.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out. Kind of.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can stretch. With this AI, like stretching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice. 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way.
Oh, we
That's
were
right.
meant to be back.
On another Thursday.
Yeah, yeah.
Always good to be here. Always good to be here. And good to see you, Tom.
Yeah,
What
and
you got going on?
tonight we're going to explore language in a different way than we have in the past. We had that Italian night or the musical term night, which
Yep.
Italian had a lot to do with the musical terms.
That's
But
right.
Anne showed me a video earlier, got me thinking of all different approach in music relate and
Mhm.
whether language whether music is a language, which I've always felt like it's the universal language.
Mhm.
You know, but we're going to look at some different approaches to how music has influenced language and language has influenced music, and how sometimes what you hear is not always necessarily what the language meant for you to hear. It's the
Mhm.
wrapped up like a deuce kind of situation.
Yep. Or there's a bathroom on the right.
Yeah.
All that kind of
And it's really interesting to see how language has mutated, throughout time, and I,
thing.
I feel like some of that mutation came from the fact that we use language in music. A lot of those weird sayings that people say, it's it's um it's like that situation where you have the guy at the end whisper into the next guy's ear,
The
and then
telephone
that guy
game. Yeah.
whispers into the next ear, and then by the time you get to the end, um, you hear something totally different.
Indeed. Telephone game. That was always one of my favorites because it does really show how, people just, they don't say or they don't hear what they think they hear, or they fill in from their head things that they thought they heard, and the message changes by the time it gets to the end. And it's pretty eye opening when you see that stuff going on.
Yeah, and it's funny to see how some people interpret some of these. Here, let's take a look. And the first one that we're going to be looking at tonight actually has a bunch of examples of, nip it in the butt is the one that I liked.
Yep. Spread like wildflowers.
And eggcorns. The whole conversation started with the eggcorns, and acorns. That's what I always knew, but apparently some people call them eggcorns.
Not me. We're safe.
Yeah, the eggcorns is a new one for me.
hmm
But
Indeed.
this is the video that got me started down this language rabbit hole, and
Mhm.
that one's going to be coming from Words. And as I started searching around to see the relationship between music and language, really found a lot of different videos. Unfortunately, some of the best ones were TED
Mhm.
Talks. I would have
Sure.
loved to have included them, but you know, with the TED Talks,
Mhm.
they don't like people sharing them. They want you to watch them over there. So if anybody is really interested in language and music, and you go search that on YouTube,
Mhm.
you'll see a lot of great TED Talks about like the evolution of music and languages.
Yeah, one of my things about music as a language, like whether it is or not, is not really the question, but the fact that you can see, a child who can barely speak, but they walk by a band that's playing and they start moving, like they just, something in them just gets them moving. They're not watching somebody dance; they're just something inside is getting them to go, and that's one of those things that that's how to me universal is, or music is a universal kind of a language, because you don't need to know the language, you don't need to know the words. It's like you got the beat, you got what's going on with the sound. If you're, you know you're receiving it, you're getting it. That's the important thing. But also the fact that vocabulary, music has, a vocabulary to it. And that's where, when learning music, again, people who wanted to just get the music that was inside and let it out was one thing, and they didn't want to tarnish it by listening to other people's music. But to me, it was more about building up the vocabulary. Like, just trying to come up with your own language from nothing is very, very difficult compared to trying to learn a language everybody already knows.
Oh, then you are gonna love some of the videos we have tonight.
All right.
Because that ties in. We're gonna take a quick look. This is a real an excerpt from a speech that Noam Chomsky did,
Yep.
and he was asked this question about language and music. And
Mhm.
the reason why I wanted to include is he gives some references that I found really interesting that are going to send me down another rabbit hole.
Nice.
This will probably be a multi-part series for us,
Indeed.
and that
It's a
one's
good
going to be
topic.
coming.
So, I mean, there's a lot to it.
Yep, this one's going to be coming from Chomsky's philosophies, and then 12 tone. You're familiar with
Hmm.
12 tone. I love their sketch style that they do, and it really makes it easy to understand when they're covering a topic. And
Hmm.
12 tone's actually going to slide in twice tonight. Inadvertently the second time, but this one is just going to ask the question, is music really a language? And that's going to start the thought process of either you consider it one or you don't.
Hmm.
And I think the argument here will actually be that, it's not necessarily a universal language, but I feel it is.
Hmm. It's also that just there are commonalities between music and language, or parallels, I should say, where you can see, even if music isn't a language by strict definition, it acts as a language in enabling people to communicate together and things like that. So,
Yeah, it is a form of communication.
yeah.
Then we're going to dive back into the music translation thing, and Tom Scott, fresh new channel.
Hmm.
Um, he's going to talk about contrafactum.
Hmm.
New word for me, but when I went and searched it up, I was like, oh, that's what this is. In vocal music, contrafactum or contrafact is the substitution of one text for another without substantial change to the music. And that's where you begin to get people who hear one thing when the musician might have been saying something else.
Right.
So
The other question
Tom's
is how much of it is like trying to fit something in, and like none of the words are fitting because it's the wrong number of syllables or something, and you try to fit in another word there instead.
Yeah, and again, you're gonna like one of our later videos here because it
Mhm.
gets into that.
Right. Exactly.
So after that,
Hmm.
we're gonna go to Tom Scott, and this is another one, Freshy Channel, and him and 12 Tones kind of have the double header together because um, this first one, Tom's going to be talking about a language made of music. I think it was Sutre, Francois Sutre, the composer,
Hmm.
who came up with a seven syllable language that was based off of musical notes.
Hmm. Do re mi fa sol la ti do.
Yeah, and it's done by 12 tone on Tom's channel and with the same kind of sketch
Mhm.
explanation.
Nice.
And then Kevin Abroad is going to talk about music and language learning and some of the benefits of using music and to understand language, and the benefits of approaching language with the music mentality. And he really hits on some good points about, like, the mental benefits of understanding music and language and how they relate with each other.
Mhm.
Makes for a smarter person.
Oh yeah, and even understanding, if you ever listen to any operas, and there's opera in Italian, there's opera in German. You can listen to things in different languages. If you have an appreciation of the languages, you'll see how different languages interact with music differently, and how
Yeah.
a lot of the Romance languages, they flow very much. That's why Italian, it really flows when you're just trying to rolls off the tongue, so to speak. Whereas a language like German is very abrupt sounding, to an outside ear.
Percussive. German is percussive to me.
And a lot of people say angry, comparatively compared to like a French, which is softer and more smooth, but it all depends. Like each of those facets, are part of that language. And if you're trying to make music that's angry or what have you, then maybe German's the way to go with it. Or if you're trying to make music that's very flowing and fluid, then maybe something in French. There's different choices you can make that can really impact the way the music comes across based on the language that you choose to do it in.
Yeah, and that's almost the rabbit hole that I was going to go down, was going to be like, music in different languages. And then I started seeing all this stuff, and I'm like, I think we need to understand language first, and
Sure.
then we'll have a night where we go into
We look at the palette of languages and what to choose at which times. Yeah.
Yeah, and that can be kind of tied in a little with the classical too, because
Sure.
that's where you get a lot of the different languages.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the last one, this goes back to what you were saying about vocabulary and syllables and Jack Rush, but almost all freshies, like
Nice.
in the middle and the end. And what I liked about this one is he's going to correlate soloing and how to improve your soloing by thinking more like vocabulary and syllables, and by doing so, this can help you to improve like your soloing technique, because to me soloing is just basically singing. So
Yeah.
if you do it right, you're doing what the singer would normally do, except with the instrument.
Right. And the important thing is, on that line, or to that point exactly, is the singer has to breathe in between phrases. So, there should be some notes, and then there should be some space, to allow appreciation and rest. So that's where a lot of people, when they first start learning, when they first get fast with their technique and they're first able to like they do that for the next 3 years because it's so fun and it sounds so good. But at the same time, it's not for all the time. It's like, where to put that and when to slip that in there, but you also got to know when to just let that one note just kind of ring out, and when to just leave nothing and just let space happen, and then jump back in when it's appropriate. That all of those things take a lot of time to develop, but just understanding, the nuts and bolts of it, like using phrases. Like I've seen, we looked at something, the difference between licks and phrases, and how to like put things together in a song when you're trying to do rhythm guitar and you're just adding a little, doo-doo-doo-doo, like here or there, just adding a little phrase that's not necessarily part of the main melody, but it's just something, it's an accent thing basically, to throw it in there as something different, so it doesn't just sound like you're going chunka the whole time, on the rhythm guitar.
Yeah.
But
When you're doing your solos, if you're wondering if they're coming across naturally, ask yourself, could you sing this solo? Could you vocally do this solo with your voice? And if it is, you can do it with your voice, but do you normally talk like that?
Would you sing that way? Right, exactly. And that was one that Victor Wooten did in his Groove Workshop as well. Was talking about, he had some of the guys that were there with basses. He had them do a solo, and then he stopped them and basically said, "Okay, now this time I want you to actually sing something. You're going to sing the solo, and then you're going to play what you're singing while you do it." And what he ended up doing, the guy, he was like, he kind of scolded him a little bit afterwards. He's like, I could tell that a couple of those were like licks that you know how to play, that you just, decided to sing because you know how to play it, rather than, singing what you would normally sing and then try to figure out how to play it on the fly. So there was a couple little things in there for that, but it's basically just, trying to open it up by going with the phrasing that you would use for singing, as well as, using that as a thought. But another important point is chord tone targeting. When you're soloing, even through chord changes and what have you, knowing where the root, the third, and the fifth are for the chord that you're playing right now is super important, and landing, especially on that third, is something that's super melodic. Like, because everyone comes back to the root all the time. You're playing in C, so everyone's gonna do boom and come back to that C at the end, just because it's resolution. But with everybody in the band doing that, if you come back and land on the third at the end, you're actually accenting what key you're in, because they're hitting the root, you're hitting the third. Between the two of you, you're perfectly outlining that chord. So it's one of those things where knowing the chord tones, knowing where the root, the third, and the fifth are, and organizing your solos where you're doing phrases or whether you're doing runs or whatever, knowing where you want to land and when you want to land there, and landing on that root, third, or fifth. Super important.
And again, going back to language, it's the same thing when you're trying to make a point. You're giving a speech and you want to have impact on certain words and certain phrases, because that's how good communication works.
Where do you want to draw the listener's attention? Yeah.
The notes do the same thing as the words do in those cases.
Yep, exactly. And a lot of times there's a message you're trying to get through. Don't let the notes or the words that you're trying to play get in the way of the message. Like, let the message get through. Don't just hammer it through with because that's not necessarily the message you were trying to send.
Exactly. So for our first one, this is going to give us some food for thought on language itself. This is a really cool channel. And like I said, threw this at me and I was like, this is a cool discussion and a cool topic. He's got a whole channel on different language analysis and, why certain words are a certain way, and how different languages relate with each other. This stuff always has fascinated me. Especially as my first language was French, Canadian French, but then I went to school, all my classmates spoke English, and the French fell off as the English took over, but I could always see correlation in certain words and terms.
Oh yeah. Now, do you still, if you see words that are in French, do you pronounce them with that French accent? Like, that's one of my buddy's pet peeves. Like, he hates when people do that, but to me, it makes sense. Like, if you see a word that's in French and you're speaking in English and there's a French word there, you're not necessarily going to butcher it into English just because you're speaking English, right? I mean, you get to that word and you say it the way it's supposed to be said, right?
It depends on the word, because if it's like mild, we are talking mild.
Yes, we are.
For anybody French out there.
Nice. And that's the way it works.
This one's going to be coming from @RobWords, and he's also got a mothership. Well, he's on X @RobWords YT, and Instagram RobWatts87. He's got a Patreon. If you're big on languages, you're gonna like this channel.
Nice.
And this one gets into those terms that have mutated over the years, and I guess some people see eggcorns falling from trees. In a dog world, I've been there.
I do love when I hear phrases like that, though, where what the phrase is, I know what the phrase is, but somebody says it and it's like not quite what it's supposed to be, and it's like, well, you understand that they're using it properly in the context, like it's in the right context, so it's the right phrase in the right context, but the phrase is just a little bit wrong, where it's like, no, that was so close.
Well, try not to take it for granted.
Yes, never take it for granted. I hear that one a lot.
Yeah, that is one that I've heard.
The one that always gets me, I was talking about the other day, was etc. instead of etc. because it's the first word et, et phone home, etc. But so many people say ek.
I say etc.
Yeah, that works too. That is allowed.
At least I spell it that way, because I don't know how to spell etc.
But do you say LOL or do you say lol?
Nowadays, I find myself actually saying lol out loud. Like, lol, that's funny.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm sure that the modern languages are going to incorporate some of our social computer speak.
Rufflamau.
Yeah. So let's see what Rob has to say about like how language has mutated. That's the gist of what he's going to cover here.
I like it.
In a dog-eat-dog world, it's time to nip something in the butt. There's a linguistic phenomenon that's spreading like wildflowers. In this video, let's investigate EGGCORNS, the misheard versions of terms that ride roughshod over the originals. Some may pass you by without you battering an eyelid. You take them completely for granted. Others will make you want to curl up in the feeble position and cry, "Cease and desist." So let's see which ones pass mustard and which are just damp squids. Without further ado, it's time for another Rob Words. Okay, I can see you're chomping at the bit, so I won't leave you on tender hooks any longer. Let's get down to brass tacks. What exactly is an EGGCORN? Well, let me show you, because I just used a whole load of them. So what do all these terms and phrases have in common? Well, they're wrong. The phrase isn't dog-eat-dog world, it's dog-eat-dog world. And you don't nip something in the butt, not if you want to avoid a lawsuit, you nip it in the bud. And it's the fetal position, not the feeble position. But nevertheless, these are all things that people actually say. They're close to the original sayings, in fact, they make their own sort of sense, but they're not quite right. They are EGGCORNS. The term EGGCORN, meaning these quirky mishearings, was first coined by a group of linguists back only a couple of decades ago, and there's a charming story behind why they called them that. So basically what happened is, well actually, why don't I let one of them explain it?
I'm sorry, how the name arose is what you're asking?
That's esteemed Professor Mark Lieberman from the University of Pennsylvania, who is pretty much the EGGCORN king. Google EGGCORNS and his name soon comes up. So I asked him if he wouldn't mind joining us to tell us what happened, and he said yes. It all started back in 2004.
Another linguist named Chris Potts sent me email about a case in which a woman had written egg space corns, meaning acorn. She was concerned about the fact that acorns had fallen on her car because she had parked it under an oak tree. When we looked into it, we discovered that there were many other people who had made a similar inference, so to speak. And for at least certain people from certain dialect regions of the US, acorn and eggcorn are actually basically homophonous. They're basically pronounced the same way.
Professor Lieberman and his fellow linguists felt they stumbled across something as yet undefined, a phenomenon that didn't fit within the definitions of other linguistic mix-ups. This wasn't a straightforward mishearing. EGGCORN sort of made sense. I mean, it does look like an egg, and it is a corn or a seed. So the question was, with this new brand of aural accident, what to call it?
So Jeff Pullum, a week later, said, well, look, if there's no suitable word, then we should just make it eponymous. That is, take the example as the source of the name, and let's call them EGGCORNS. So we suggested that, and the term stuck. So it has now made it into, the Oxford English Dictionary and Merriam-Webster's Dictionary and the Collins English Dictionary and so on.
Well, it's not every day you get to hear from someone who got a word into the dictionary. To fully understand what EGGCORNS are, you sort of need to understand what they're not as well, because there are lots of other everyday errors that we make in speech that are similar, but they ain't EGGCORNS. One category of which are malapropisms. So these are named after a character in the 18th century play The Rivals by Richard Brinsley Sheridan, the snooty Mrs. Malaprop. Her name's actually a play on the French term malapropos, which basically means wrong or inappropriate. And a quirk of her character was to use wrong or inappropriate words. As Professor Lieberman says, she's
trying to use fancier words than she knows and getting them wrong, like talking about allegory as an alligator.
She's as headstrong as an allegory on the banks of the Nile. Nay, madam.
That one's a beaut. Other gems from Mrs. Malaprop include, he is the very pineapple of politeness. Pinnacle. And sure, if I reprehend anything in this world, it is the use of my oracular tongue and a nice derangement of epitaphs. Apprehend, vernacular, arrangement, epithets. So when anyone else makes a similarly bad choice of word, we can call that a malapropism. Isn't an eggcorn just a type of malapropism then? Well, no.
We usually think of malapropisms as being sort of mistakes that are the result of people being uneducated or something like that, whereas eggcorns are something that can happen to anybody, basically.
Yes, even you. Or me, in fact. Researching this, I discovered I've been using free rein wrongly all my life, or should I say free rein? Yes, because the image it's supposed to conjure is one of a horse being kept only loosely under control, not one of a monarch with unlimited power. I think I've probably gotten away with it because the two sound exactly the same, but free rein is a classic eggcorn because it makes its own kind of sense, and poor Mrs. Malaprop and her malapropisms do not. There's another funny phenomenon that is like an eggcorn, but different. The mondegreen. Like eggcorn, the term mondegreen comes from an example of the error itself. It comes from this Scottish folk song.
Ye Hielands and ye Lowlands, oh where hae ye been? They slain yellow Marie and laid him on the green.
Poor Lady Mondegreen. Except, let's watch it again, but with the actual lyrics.
Oh where hae ye been? They slain yellow Marie and laid him on the green.
The most famous Mondegreens are misheard song lyrics. You know how Jimi Hendrix did not in fact sing "Excuse me while I kiss this guy."
Excuse me while I kiss this guy.
And the reason that they're different to eggcorns is not that they appear in songs, in fact they can appear anywhere, but that their meanings are completely different to what was originally intended. But an eggcorn replaces the original phrase without altering the intended meaning. Whether you're describing someone as a social pariah or a social piranha, you're making the same point. So now we have an idea what eggcorns are and are not. See how many you can spot in this next bit. So I've had to go deep into the internet in researching this video, into areas ripe with dangers. And what's more, because we've got builders in at my place, I've been doing it on an unsecured Wi-Fi network at a cafe. Luckily, I've been protected to all intensive purposes because I've been using NordVPN. It's no old wise tale. A VPN really is a brilliant way to keep your data safe when surfing the web, and NordVPN gives you all that protection and more. It blocks malware if you wander into uncharted parts of the internet, stops you being tracked by cloaking your IP, sounds the death knell for malicious ads by blocking them, and keeps you secure around the clock. Plus you can have it on up to 6 devices at a time, so you can keep your whole family safe too. Having a VPN leaves you with all kinds of benefits at your beck and call, like enabling you to access streaming content from all over the world. And if you've got holiday plans, another French benefit is that NordVPN can save you money on travel websites that hike their prices when they see that you've been there before. So to solve your internet security problems in one foul swoop, go to nordvpn.com/robwords to get the 2-year plan with an exclusive deal, plus 1 bonus month on top. It's risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee, so just give it a go. Or did you spot them all? So, have I mentioned any that you've been using wrongly yet? If not, I am determined to find one by the time that we're through, because it's almost certain that you've used at least one. And that's not to insult you. Eggcorns are not necessarily a sign of ignorance. On the contrary, in many cases, they're a sign of creative intelligence. Eggcorns very often form when someone is trying to make sense of what to their ear is nonsensical. They're doing verbal gymnastics to try and find a phrase that works with the context and the sounds that they've just come across. Say you've heard someone voicing disapproval about another person's clothing, or more precisely, lack of it. Well, if you've never come across the phrase scantily clad before, or the word scantily at all, it's perfectly logical to then interpret that sound as scandally clad. It's kind of clever. You even had to invent a word. As one of Professor Lieberman's colleagues, Jeff Pullum, puts it, it would be so easy to dismiss EGGCORNS as signs of illiteracy and stupidity, but they are nothing of the sort. They are imaginative attempts at relating something heard to lexical material already known. So let's see if we can find some others. Well, if you are scandally clad, you're only one step away from another EGGCORN, but one that has me and Mark Lieberman confused. One that is troubling me is butt naked and buck naked, because I can't quite work out which one's correct. I've definitely been using butt naked.
Well, I don't know. The American Heritage Dictionary says that buck naked is an alteration of butt naked. Well, they're not sure. But Paul Bryan's in Common Errors in English Usage says that butt naked is a mistake, that it was originally buck naked, referring to Native Americans and black slaves, so it's condescending and racist, and so probably shouldn't be used. You know, who knows?
It's exactly why it's causing me such pain. It's because I can't find out. I was hoping you might have the answer, but
Well, apparently not.
So there we are. Well, actually, it was quite funny. I was willing to leave the issue there, but Professor Lieberman was not, and he continued to try and get to the bottom of it, even while I was attempting to ask him about something completely different. Do you think you're hypersensitive to spotting them?
I'm sorry, before we get to that, I just looked up buck naked in the OED. It says it's colloquial, originally and chiefly US, and it says CF, butt naked, but it doesn't tell you which one came from which.
I think in future I'll just say naked. But these EGGCORNs really can be found in all sorts of contexts, from the militaristic, check out shot across the bowels instead of the nautical shot across the bows, to the medical. Have you ever heard of someone living with old-timers disease, or suffering mind grains, or how about having post-traumatic stress disorder? Google them, they all get used. I mean, really? Old-timers disease? Well, if you have ever at any point thought Alzheimer's disease was called that, you are not alone. All these people are with you.
Alzheimer's disease, who knows who Alzheimer's was, but if you think of it as old-timers disease, it makes sense because it afflicts old-timers.
True, this is a case where the mishearing actually makes arguably more sense than the actual term. And there are lots of EGGCORNs that, to the modern listener, seem more logical than the original. Take whet your appetite instead of whet your appetite. I mean, when was the last time anyone used whet in any other context? Whereas the idea of a soggy, salivating mouth is the perfect image for the situation. While we're dining out on this, isn't just desserts an easier concept than just desserts? I mean, we don't use dessert as in something one deserves very often now, whereas you might well imagine someone receiving the appropriate pudding to befit their past behaviour. No ice cream if you don't finish your vegetables. And there are more. Isn't a squid more likely to be damp than a squib? I mean, what is a squib anyway?
It was a word that was used for, small explosives. What we would now call a firecracker was called a squib.
Ah, so the idea is that it doesn't go off because it's damp.
It got wet.
Yeah, now that does obviously make more sense than... And why would...
Damp is normal for a squid. In fact, if it was dried, that would be problematic in general. So.
Yeah, there's nothing disappointing about a sea creature being moist. If you haven't found this video to be a damp squid so far, maybe hit subscribe. I'll be eternally grateful. You know, there's a tendency when talking about linguistic errors to feel like there's something new. Every generation tends to loathe to some extent the way the generation after them speaks. And EGGCORNs might seem to support this declinist idea. Why are we now starting to get these things wrong? But the fact is, the name may be relatively new, but EGGCORNs themselves are not. For example, people have been misquoting William Shakespeare's to the manor born as to the manor born for centuries. Why? Because it makes sense, doesn't it? Actually, it was the name of an occasionally funny British sitcom in the 1980s.
He's got about as much charm as Grimsby Dockyard.
Another old mishearing is asparagus as the adorable sparrowgrass, for which you can find examples as far back as the 17th century. It was widely used until the Latin lovers put everyone straight. Although some language fans will argue that that is not an eggcorn, but something called a folk etymology. Why? Because for at least a time, sparrowgrass or slight variants on it were the standard form, rather than just being used by an unknowing minority.
What distinguishes an eggcorn from a so-called folk etymology is that it's a sort of isolated event that is a few people here and there make the mistake, but it's not something that becomes a standard part of the language.
A further good example of a folk etymology is also of the vegetative variety. It's the Jerusalem artichoke, which does not come from Jerusalem. It's actually native to North America. But the Jerusalem bit is a result of it being related to the sunflower plant, the name for which in Italian is girasole. That got misheard or reinterpreted by English speakers as Jerusalem. A Jerusalem artichoke isn't an artichoke either, but the reason we call it one is the result of another catalogue of errors involving the Italians and the French and goodness knows who else. Too much to go into now. The point is, it's a folk etymology because the folk came up with their own erroneous interpretation of where the words came from, and it stuck. And it's a case that Professor Lieberman actually raised in his original blog post back in 2004.
I mentioned Jerusalem artichoke as an example, as a relevant example, and of course that is a folk etymology because it's the standard term for that particular species of flower. But anyway, the phenomenon of reinterpreting either a word from an older version of your language, a word borrowed from another language, a word from a technical subvocabulary or whatever, in terms of a different set of morphemes that are more familiar to you and make more sense to you, is something I'm sure people have been doing as long as there have been languages.
So that's another reason not to feel bad if you've been using one of these eggcorns, folk etymologies, mondegreens or malapropisms, because the fact is they've probably always existed. So if you can think of any good examples of those, then by all means stick them in the comments below. Oh, and Professor Lieberman wants your help with something.
I don't know very many eggcorn-like inventions in other languages than English. I know French reasonably well. Seems like I should know some French eggcorns. I can read Spanish. I can read German. And of course, I could have read about, I probably have in the end, read about eggcorns in other languages. I just don't remember.
So if you know any, pop them in the comments and I'll flag them up to him. Or alternatively, go to the blog post that he wrote because of our little chat where he asked for more examples of those. I'll leave a link below. The only one I can think of is related to our friend from earlier in the video, the damp squid. A pal of mine got a little confused by the German word for squid, which is Tintenfisch, literally ink fish. But she thought it was Tittenfish, which would be an altogether different animal. If you have enjoyed this, I think you're going to like my one about medieval words that I think we should bring back. Or if not, maybe this one. And if you didn't enjoy it, well, don't make me the scapegoat, jeez.
Oh,
I forgot my escape quote.
Bring on the Tittenfish.
Tintenfisch. Yeah, there you go. One of the few words I know in German is Blinkenlampen for headlights.
We learned some new words there. Malapropisms.
Yeah.
Malapropisms. And I've heard etymologies before, but and mondegreens. Is that the one that they're calling acorns? Mondegreens?
I think the mondegreens are a little bit of a different, kind of like the folk etymologies are kind of a different category. The mondegreens are a little bit different as well in the way that they're, in the way that the word is not the same or the meaning is not the same, like the way that these are. that's one where they had the two different categories, kind of, or three different categories, even, or
Well,
how they're kind of.
I found it fascinating that like this new form of wordplay hasn't been more common throughout time. Like I'm curious as to why this is happening more with the English language than say with other languages. I want to check out that PDF you mentioned.
Yeah, I would say that it probably doesn't happen more in English than other languages. It's just that more, we speak English, so we'd be looking at all the English examples and we have a broader, base to look at. But if we, fluidly spoke several languages and were, hanging out in those other languages more often, we would probably hear them in all the languages, really.
Yeah, and maybe it's how we're descriptive with English, where somebody would say that looks like an egg and it's a corn, and all of a sudden a new word gets put into Webster's.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it depends on the number of people as well. That's what kind of also where you're saying with the folk etymology, where a person here or there making the mistake, even if it's a couple of the same people making the same mistake in an area, it's not widespread. It's not like everywhere everyone says it like this, that kind of thing. But there are also ones that are very specific regionally, like what do you call it, where you would put your driver's license and your insurance in your car? Like, what's that little thing called that you put that stuff in?
The glove compartment?
Yeah, like my friend used to call it the glove box. And like, just when I said compartment, he's like laughing at me, like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, what do you call it? And he's like, it's the glove box. And I started laughing at him because I'm like, what are you talking about? It's always been the glove compartment. I mean,
that's like the difference between a garage and a carport.
Yeah, sure. Same thing, but it's just a question of, what it's called, where you, grew up, or where you formed your thoughts of things, your language. Is it a lorry or is it a truck? I mean, that's, if you were born in London or if you were born in New York, it's going to be a different thing, but it's the same thing.
Are you going to the loo or are you going to the toilet?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just a question of, which ones you formulated yourself, but knowing multiple languages also allows you to see it from different angles as well. So you can see, why they would call it this or why someone would call it that. Sometimes it's just easier to say something in a different language. Like the one in French is, the je ne sais quoi, like that one, you can't really capture that essence, in another language. It just sounds like kind of ham-handed any other way, so that's one that just needs to stay in the original language. But,
well, and doesn't that kind of mean like I can't explain, like it's
basically I don't know
unexplainable.
Yep, it's like you're trying to talk about something that is I don't know what. It's like it's just off the tip of your tongue kind of a thing. So that's one that kind of again loses it in other kinds of descriptions, but you get that sense of it's got that certain something, to it.
That je ne sais quoi that I can't explain.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think why it might seem more common now is like Webster's didn't used to like update itself as much as it seems to nowadays, with urban slang and other things really propagating more thanks to the internet.
I'd say that's it right there, is the rate of propagation and the fact that there's so much new stuff that happens and it can be adopted so quickly by such a wide range of people that eventually they're like, okay, well, if everyone's using it, then we need to get it in there because everyone's using it.
And I found it real interesting to see the musical examples he was showing there with the singer, and how when you hear like singing in different languages and it's harder to make out like what they're saying, it's the same as the Shakespearean effect. Like,
sure,
you're hearing people speak English but in a unusual way, and all of a sudden you start substituting words.
And for me, I've always had a pretty good ear with accents, but like I remember one time just going down to North Carolina with my mom and my sister back when I was, 13. But we, go to a diner and the waitress is asking my mom if she wants grits with what she's ordering. So, you want grits with that? And my mom's like, excuse me? So she repeated, and she said it perfectly clearly, would you like grits with that? And like, she had to say it like 3-4 times. And finally I'm like, Mom, would you like grits with that? Because we're not used to hearing the word grits at all, number one. Number two, it wouldn't be like something I would be like, yeah, I'll have grits with that. Like, that's not something we would normally think of because we were from New Jersey. So New Jersey is not really a grits kind of place. But down south, it's perfectly, I'm sure, they hear that question all the time. You want grits with that? Oh, yeah, I'm good. Or no, yeah, whatever.
Or if you ever watched Alice at Mel's Diner and Flo was like, kiss my grits.
Exactly. But it was just one of those that's a a very regional thing in terms of like I had to literally translate for mom, even though they're speaking English. It's just they're speaking it in such an accent that she wasn't really familiar with. And at the time, I mean, I didn't have much exposure to the Southern accent, but I can I can figure out what they're trying to say. So I've always had a good ear for accents and for language in general. And I think that's why like the ear for music also kind of builds from the same place.
You might have a little bit of a Southern boy in you.
Yeah, well, I did spend some time down south after that, and there is some Southern that creeps into my accent when I'm speaking with someone who has a Southern accent. It's like one of those things where you won't normally you would hear me speak and you wouldn't think there's any Southern in my accent at all. But if I say the word y'all, or if I'm talking about something and say, hey, how y'all doing? Like just throw something like that out there, that kind of gives it away, but it's not very thick in the accent. It's just one of those things that it comes out more when I'm surrounded by people that are speaking that way. If everyone that I'm around is speaking in a Southern accent, I'll usually slip into it accidentally.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. When I was in Texas and a little while in Georgia, that happened to me. And especially Texas, like it took about 6-7 months of being down there. And next thing I knew, I found myself sliding into their drawl.
yeah, and a lot of it, it's like I want to be careful. I don't try to do it because I'm not, I don't want people to think I'm mocking them, by talking like them when I wasn't talking that way a minute ago. But it's more just one of those things that happens. You slide into the accent more than you would surrounded by people who are using it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna have to check out more of his channel and see if he has anything on that and the assimilation of accent and things like that. That's another thing that fascinates me.
Yeah. I've even, had friends who, they came over to this country when my one friend was, I think, 10 when she came over and her sister was 7. And just seeing that, that when she came over at 10, she still has, a bit of an accent, but she speaks, perfect English, college here, everything, but, a slight accent still. But her sister who came and was 3 years younger at the time, no accent at all. And they grew up in the same house. So you would think that, but it's just that difference between starting to try to learn a new language at 7 versus 10. There's this whole difference in assimilation and how much of the older sounds, I guess, stay in there. And it wasn't, again, it's not a bad accent. It's just one of those things that you notice more. There's a slight accent here and no accent there.
Well, I think that's why I didn't have the Canadian accent as a kid, because kindergarten is when I started to shift from French to English, and the accent never stuck. Whereas my cousin, who had moved down from Canada a few years later, could never totally get rid of his Canadian accent. It was always there.
Yeah. And like, I don't feel like I have a strong New York accent or a strong New Jersey accent, but there are things that are a giveaway that, I come from that area in terms of the way, the words that I use and sounds like that. And sometimes, hey, what are you doing? That kind of thing, it'll come out, it'll sound like New York. But when I would go down south, people, they would find out where I'm from. Like, no, you're way too laid back and way too nice to be from the New York area.
They're not wrong.
They're not wrong. So I couldn't turn them on that one. But it's just, it's just one of those things. Like, yeah, I'm from there. It's just that, I have a relatively neutral accent compared to, it's not the Jersey Shore kind of accent. And it's not New York, so it's more, more nuanced, I guess.
Well, even in New York, there's a difference between, like, say, Brooklyn and like Hell's Kitchen.
Oh yeah. And that's the thing is, again, I've been in Jersey most of my life. So it's like, it's right nearby. Like I can see New York City from here. I was there last Sunday. Went lunch and a show. It was nice with my mom and my sister and my nephew, and had fun. That's on Mother's Day. But it's, again, I live 8 miles from New York City and I almost never go there. But this was one that was like, do a whole thing and get everybody together and go. And it was just a really nice day. Worked out well.
You'll get exposed to a lot of language in New York. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. You can even learn sign language when you're driving. Yeah.
That was at Rob Words over on YouTube. Freshy channel and good resource for language learning.
Nice. And,
Chomsky. Yeah, I wanted to add this one because Noam Chomsky's name kept coming up as I was searching for all of these, and I was wondering why. In this little excerpt, he gets asked this question, and in his answer, he gives some good references that I want to dig more into in the future and see what he's talking about, how, like, language and music in their interrelation. This kind of leads us into some of these next videos and the relationship between music and language.
And one of the ones that I would just mention is if you do medical scans, if you do brain scans of somebody who is actively using language, and you do brain scans of somebody who's actively doing music, you'll find that there's similar regions or a similar, marshaling of all the different regions of the brain. Like music seems to engage a very large amount of the brain, and language as well. Like, you're trying to remember concepts and words and all these kinds of things that are tying all together. So I think that's another way that I see music and language related, is to how they are represented in the brain when you're actually looking at somebody who's focused on either of those things.
Yeah. One of the other videos I was looking at earlier this week showed the brain activity as a person is learning a language and when they're doing music, and like, the brain's exploding when you're doing those things. It's very healthy for creative thought.
And remember the Mozart effect. We'll look that up again for another time, another night, because that's another one that
yeah.
I think brain scans and the Mozart effect. Like, we'll find some interesting things from that as well.
Yeah, we had looked kind of at that when we looked at the babies and music and development, and
Exactly.
that kind of got me gathering some videos for that.
Nice.
So this channel is really, if you're familiar with Chomsky, or you want to learn more about it, this channel is really cool. It's got a lot of different clips and excerpts, and a lot of information coming from him.
Nice.
It's at Chomsky's philosophy ownership. Own it, Chomsky.
There you go.
But it's a collection of his ideas and his analysis. This just really fit perfectly for what we're going to be discussing tonight.
Nice. Take it away, Noam.
Well, there are analogies between language and music, and they've been studied. I won't have time to talk about it, and I don't know much about it, but there's interesting work. There's Leonard Bernstein actually had a book on this. I forget what it's called, but it was the Elliot Norton lectures that he gave at Harvard about 20 years ago or so, which he tried to develop analogies between language and music. There were various people who were dissatisfied with the way he did it and tried other ways. The best known case is joint work by a very good linguist, Ray Jackendoff, and a modern composer, Fred Lerdahl. Jackendoff's also a near professional musician himself. They did a book, again, forget the title, Lerdahl and Jackendoff, which is on it's actually on tonal music in the Western tradition, and tries to show that it has some characteristics that you also find in language, which is it's interesting. And there could even be a common origin. In fact, the same could be true about mathematics. Like how people have the ability to do mathematics is quite a mystery from an evolutionary point of view. I mean, it certainly was no factor in selection. Like, in hunter-gatherer societies, you didn't have more children if you could prove theorems about prime numbers or something like that. So it played no role in the evolution of humans. In fact, up till now, just like right now, in fact, many humans just don't even know they have the capacity because it's never been evoked by experience or whatever. So it's some kind of capacity that's there but played no role in human evolution, and that raises the question of what it's doing there. And one, speculation that's been around is it's some kind of abstraction from the language faculty, that it takes some of the properties of the language faculty, throws out a lot of others, and then you get arithmetic, let's say, which is not so crazy. As I mentioned, this property of discrete infinity is realized very sharply in arithmetic, and it's true of natural language, and you could conceive of the idea that maybe it's just there because you throw away the rest of the language faculty and you keep this. And the same could be true of music. Maybe some of its structural properties and so on, the kind that Bernstein and Jackendoff and Lerdahl and others have studied, are some kind of abstraction from the language faculty, and maybe that's why it has some of the same properties. Or maybe they have some common origin, or maybe they just develop totally separately and we don't know why. It's certainly something one can look at and people have looked at, but it's pretty obscure.
Oh, I want to look more at it, Noam. That is interesting to see what he was saying, the abstraction layer of how music relates to language, whether it's actually part of it or it's just another way of communicating that takes a different approach than our normal word language.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing is, whether it is an abstraction came from language or whether it was just from being in a world where you're seeing all these things and, well, I have a number for, or I have a word for, how many of us there are sitting right here, but do I have a word for how many leaves there are on that tree or on, and look at all the trees, like put all those numbers together and just thinking about things like that and trying to come up with, ways to get those concepts across to another person. Like, how many leaves are there on all the trees in North America? I mean, that's a big number. I mean, that's not 1,000. That's not 1,000,000. I mean, that's a really, really big number. And trying to get your mind around numbers like that is something that, I used to do that when I was a kid and just, think about these, massive numbers of things like grains of sand in the Sahara Desert. I mean, just like, you can think about, a handful of sand and you think about how much sand there is right there. And then when you try to extrapolate that to, something like a desert, it's like, oh my God.
Well, and I think that's why he mentioned the mathematical relation, that goes with music, and language itself isn't mathematical. Grammar isn't a patterned math thing, but music very much is.
They're both rules based in different ways, but yeah.
Where words get tied into music, that's usually what we associate to, language and communication. But the actual notes and things that are going on there are very mathematical and pattern based, which
the overtone series, yeah.
Which might be why he considers it more like an abstraction to language rather than a language.
Indeed. And yeah, orders of magnitude. When you look at things that are just, ridiculously large numbers, it's, it's difficult to even come up with ideas around some of these big numbers. When you look at distances in space and things like that, there's just such ridiculous numbers that you're dealing with that it's really hard to even wrap your head around. Like if you looked at the distance that all of the radio signals that we've ever generated as the human species, and you looked at how far they've traveled, when you look at a map of like our area of space, and they've been traveling for a long time. It's like this tiny little pinpoint. Like that's how far all those signals have gotten. So like we haven't even, our signal hasn't even gotten out beyond this tiny little bubble.
Were you in the Zoom that night when we watched that video where the guy made a representation of just our solar system in the desert and like the distance between like our planets, and I mean he needed a lot of desert just to show like a miniature version of like the size of our solar system.
Yeah, I remember the inner planets were, a relatively small, like this one's here, and he had them at different landmarks in town or whatever. Like this one is here, this one's down the road at this place, this one's over here. But then he's like out in the desert, like, oh, we're way out.
Yeah, he had to go miles between some planets.
Exactly. And that's how, and they really are ludicrously far out there when you look at it, in our normal numbers. I mean, the sun 93 million miles away. That's really far. The moon's 250,000 miles away. That's still pretty far.
Feels close to me.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was at Chomsky's Philosophies. Great insight that he had there. And this one might be going in the same mentality that he was when it comes to, is this a language? Is it a universal language? On the universal side, I do think that like with humans, music is more universal. Obviously, I don't think we can like necessarily communicate with other species musically, or animals, but hey, Close Encounter of the Third Kind, they took that kind of mentality of, we've got aliens, we don't know how they speak. Let's try playing some notes and see
I did
if they
like them with
respond.
the big light chopper, the light board on the chopper to try to get their attention and all that. Like they had a good way of approaching that. How you would do language. What was the other one? The Rival, a newer.
The one with Amy Adams,
Yeah,
where again they ran into aliens and had to figure out how to communicate with them, and Amy touched the wall, and like all of a sudden, like, oh, we're talking.
Exactly. But yeah, and how you approach, getting two entirely separate things to have, you don't have any common language, you don't have any way of communicating, but you try to build a language together. Another one going back a ways, Enemy Mine. Do you remember that one?
Oh yeah, Louis Gossett Jr.
Yeah, yep. I like the way that they handled, the way that they kind of, learned each other's languages as well over time, having to, by necessity, they had to figure out how to communicate.
Yeah,
it's Zerky proof.
There's certain things like saying hello or I come in peace. A gesture sometimes is the language.
Yep, exactly. And again, on one other small note was the Star Trek episode I really liked, where there was the one species that everything was about stories. So it was like Darmok and Shalat, on the ocean or whatever, and that's telling a story.
Klingons are kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah, and they had to communicate by telling stories or having a common, they know the same stories so that they can, talk about a situation and describe it as, Shaka when the walls fell, like there's, however they, need to communicate it. Anyway.
Well, and isn't that kind of like how Russian works, where like there's a lot of was it euphemisms? The way the language works is you say, some of the language, you say phrases that mean multiple things.
I'm not really sure, actually. I do know some Russian, but most of it is just, little things like being able to say, I'm sorry, but I don't speak Russian well. As I don't speak Russian very well, or, everything was delicious, so было очень вкусно. There's ways to, little phrases, but those aren't, I wouldn't be able to break it down on a word by word basis in that way. One we were talking about before, though, things rhyming, and on a story with that, we were at a wedding. I was with a girlfriend of mine, and I learned Russian from her. She's from Ukraine. We had they were making a story. There was a guy who was giving a toast at the wedding, and he was going to make a story using words that people would give him. So he was asking people to give him words that rhyme so that he can make a story. And he's going around the table where we're sitting, and everyone's giving words, and everyone he speaks Russian. This is very, very Russian area where we are. He gets to me, and my girlfriend's basically telling him, oh, he doesn't speak Russian. And so I said krasiba and spasiba, and that basically is beautiful and thank you. And they happen to rhyme like that. It's like I mean, two of like the few words I know in Russian, but they happen to be like fit perfectly for the thing. And like all the people that were sitting at the table, they're just like, "Wait, what?" Because like they know I don't speak any Russian, basically. But it's like,
but thank you.
But yeah, beautiful and thank you. That seems like appropriate things to say that you'd want to get into your story, and they happen to rhyme, at least as far as I know.
Yeah.
In Russian.
If you want to find a date, those are two good words.
Krasiba.
It does sound cool too.
Spasiba.
So this next one, a familiar channel for us at 12 Tone. We've hit a couple of different topics with this YouTube channel. A lot of musical information. The sketch approach I always like. It's easy to follow, and he tends to explain what we're looking for that night really well. And that's at 12 Tone over on YouTube. And this one, he's going to ask, like, the question, is music really a universal language?
It's worth investigating.
This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. In 1826, a periodical called the Ladies' Monthly Museum published an article about the composer Carl Maria von Weber, where they described music as the universal language of nature. A decade later, the poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote that music is the universal language of mankind. This sentiment has been repeated many times in the centuries that followed, and it's not hard to see why. The idea that the art of music somehow transcends cultural boundaries, allowing communication and understanding between people all over the world, is certainly a romantic one, but is it true? Well, the question of whether or not music is actually even a language to begin with is probably better left up to the linguists, so I'll skip it and just dive right into the real heart of the quote. Is music universal? And the answer, sadly, is no. Sorry. But how can that be? I mean, I'm sure we've all heard that music is, at its heart, basically just math, and math doesn't care where you grew up. The same numbers are prime whether you're in New York or Shanghai, so how can music not be universal if it's built on something as objective as math? Well, I'll let you in on a secret. The math that music is built on doesn't actually work. That pains me to say because music math is like my favorite thing, but if I'm being completely honest, it's hard to deny that it's all a bit of a mess. Like, take intervals. At a mathematical level, an interval is really just a frequency ratio. If one sound wave is hitting your ear twice as fast as another, you've got a 1-to-2 ratio, which is what we call an octave. Another common ratio is 2-to-3, which we're told is a perfect fifth, but here's the thing. If you go play a perfect fifth on a piano, you won't actually hear a 2-to-3 ratio. Or at least you probably won't, because modern tuning doesn't have any. And this isn't just because we're too lazy to tune it correctly. This is about a fundamental conflict between math and art. It's fairly easy to prove that a system can't simultaneously have both perfect octaves and perfect fifths. Or perfect fifths anyway. Music names are weird. Point is, the entire history of Western tuning is basically just a series of attempts to work around this gaping hole in the numbers. Early systems often involve just distorting one of the fifths and then hiding it between rarely used notes so no one would notice, but that creates problems with some of the other intervals, and these days what we do is just pretend the 2-to-3 ratio is slightly smaller than it actually is so that the whole thing fits together nicely. But which solution we're using doesn't really matter. The point is that we have to make decisions. We know it's impossible to get everything we want, so we're forced to make sacrifices, and which aspects we're willing to let go of says a lot about what sorts of music we want to make. For example, one reason modern tuning tweaks all its fifths a little bit, instead of just completely ruining one of them, is that we've decided it's important to be able to easily change keys, so we need to be able to use all the notes equally. That's not a mathematical decision though, it's an artistic one, and it's one that different cultures at different points in history have made, well, differently. But music is more than just math. It's a means of expressing emotion, and since people tend to experience roughly the same set of emotions, maybe music can help us communicate our feelings when we don't have the words to describe them directly. I mean, we've all heard that major scales are happy and minor scales are sad, right? And that goes back to the math thing. Major intervals tend to be much simpler ratios than minor ones, so they sound more consonant and thus happy. Sure, we saw the math didn't quite work out, but our ears are pretty good at adjusting for slight variations, so as long as we're in the ballpark, shouldn't that sense of consonance translate across cultures? Well, first of all, the idea that major is happy and minor is sad is not wrong exactly, but definitely an oversimplification. Like, here's a short little melody I wrote. Listen to it and try to identify the implied emotion. I mean, it's definitely minor. It's basically just a walk down the D minor scale. But is it sad? That's not the word I'd use. It feels adventurous, maybe even triumphant, and if you're not getting those same emotions, well, that kind of proves my point too, doesn't it? But more importantly, the very idea of consonance isn't necessarily universal. Most of the big musical cultures in the world have some concept that certain combinations of notes sound more pleasant than others, but what exactly that looks like varies a lot. At the extreme end, studies with isolated Amazonian tribes have shown that at least some of them exhibit literally no preference between traditionally consonant and traditionally dissonant sounds, so this and this were both rated as equally pleasant. This implies that even our most fundamental reactions to music are at some level learned through exposure, and they don't come already programmed into the human brain. But for me, the biggest argument against the universal language theory lies not in the Amazon, but somewhere a little less physical. That's right, we're going on a field trip to the world of experimental music. I just did a whole video on it, so we're not going to dive too deep here, but that's fine because I only need one example. Pendulum Music by Steve Reich. In it, speakers are placed face up on the floor and microphones swing freely across them, creating feedback when they get close. As the name implies, Reich believes this is music, and I would agree with him, but a lot of people don't. Whether experimental pieces like Pendulum Music actually count as music is still pretty hotly debated to this day. But here's the thing, if music was a universal language, don't you think we could at least agree whether or not someone is speaking it? And this goes the other way too, which brings me to the Adhan, or the Muslim call to prayer. You've probably heard it before, and if you're not Muslim, there's a good chance you thought it was sung, but it's usually not even considered music. And that matters because music is traditionally forbidden in mosques. But it's not just not music because they say so. The Adhan is delivered with a specific style of recitation that is structurally very different from the Arabic concept of singing. This is, of course, a complex issue, and as a non-Muslim, I'm probably not the best best person to get into the details, but my point is that we have this thing that Westerners might hear as music, but to the people making it, not only is it often not considered music, but it's culturally important that it's not, and imposing musicality on the Adon from the outside just because we can't tell the difference is inaccurate, insensitive, and potentially offensive. But again, if music is a universal language, that really shouldn't be possible. Before we wrap up, it's worth noting that I'm far from the first person to contemplate this question. In fact, this entire video was inspired by a post by Dr. Linda Shaver Gleason over on her blog, Not Another Music History Cliché. It's a great blog, and if you're at all interested in music history or musicology, I definitely recommend checking it out. There's a link in the description. Dr. Shaver Gleason was even kind enough to review this script for me, so huge thanks to her for that. But back to the question, this is all dancing around an uncomfortable truth. While music may not be a universal language right now, it's kind of becoming one. For various historical reasons, the Western musical tradition has spread its tendrils across pretty much the entire planet. Again, researchers had to turn to isolated Amazonian tribes to find people who hadn't already been exposed to Western musical ideas. More and more cultures are incorporating Western concepts, especially in their popular music, and if that trend continues, maybe one day we'll reach a point where music truly is a universal language, spoken the same by all humanity. But if that day ever comes, it will be nothing to celebrate. It'll mean the death of musical traditions that have survived for thousands of years, and the culture of the world will be poorer for their loss. So no, music is not a universal language, and I really hope it stays that way. If you want to learn more about the myriad ways humans have found to make music, I'd recommend this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform with over 20,000 lessons in just about everything. One that I'd recommend is a course on Tuvan throat singing called Find Your Voice of Nature. I've mentioned it before, but it seemed relevant here, and it's a really interesting look into a very different musical culture. Skillshare is offering 2 free months of premium membership to the first 500 12-tone viewers to click the link in the description, and while you're there, why not check out the rest of their massive collection of educational resources? They've got lots of great stuff about all sorts of topics, so no matter what you want to learn, Skillshare's probably got a course on it. Plus, it's really affordable. Premium membership starts at less than $9 a month, and that's after the 2-month free trial, which, again, link in the description. And hey, thanks for watching, and thanks to our Patreon patrons for supporting us and making these videos possible. If you want to help out and get some sweet perks like sneak peeks of upcoming episodes, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.
Wow, I think he kind of changed my mind.
Ah, nice. That's why we do this.
Well, at the beginning when he related it to math and like how math is universal and doesn't change across locations, music can't be that way.
That's the thing is, yeah, music is very, very, I mean, there's a lot of math in music, but a lot of it is, as he said, either, not not quite mathing, or it's been shoehorned to make it all work. I mean, I understand how it all works now, but if you looked back at how, like something that was in the key of E flat back when they were writing things back in, classical composer days, didn't sound the same as something that was in F or whatever. I mean, the keys each sounded distinctly different because of the different tunings that were in play. So they wouldn't even recognize some of their own songs probably at this point.
Well, and because music is interpretive, then technically it can't mean the same thing for everybody, because the point he made at the end, if we were to turn it into something universal, we would actually lose a lot of it. A lot would have to fall by the wayside, and we would have to interpret music all the same way. I'm not sure I want to live in that world.
At the same time, it could just be that we're asking even the wrong question. Like, whether music is the universal language or not isn't really the question. It was more about, is it a language? Is it a similar language? Is it, are there parallels between music and language? Like those are also questions worth investigating.
And I like how he said at the beginning, I'll leave that to the linguists,
right,
and focus more on, just the universal side of it, and whether it is actually a language. I do still feel it's a language. It's a form of communication, but because it's interpreted and it's subjective to that, communication is tricky. Even with words, you have one person who can take something offensive and another one who's like, thank you for the compliment. So the same thing goes on with notes and
now, I also
how
love
they're utilized.
kind of like the way Jack Black was writing a song in School of Rock, just like, tell me about your day. And like the kids just start to, rode the bus to school. I rode the bus to school or whatever. Like, just, throwing kind of whatever the story, the random words, and just throwing chords behind them. And it's all about, the intensity, the intention, all of that feeds into it. It's more about how you're saying it rather than what you're saying when it comes to the message.
Yeah, well, it's like talking to babies. You could say pretty much anything, but if you do it in like ooh, ga, goo, gaga kind of approach, the baby's like, yeah.
Yep, exactly.
They're not interpreting your words so much as they are your presentation, your emotion.
Exactly. The nonverbal cues.
Yep. That one's from at 12 Tone. Awesome channel.
Oh, yeah.
Been going back and back. Every time we have a theme, I tend to check this one to see if there's something that fits.
Nice.
And we will be looking at a little more from them in the next video afterwards. But before we do, Tom Scott, when I came across this one, this is something I've been talking about for the last 4 years that we've been doing shows, and I always found it hilarious how songs get translated into people's ears. And just like we were looking in the first video, how people mix up the words and turn them into like totally different meanings. Tom at Tom Scott Go over on YouTube, he's going to be talking about why song translations usually suck.
Nice.
And for those who it's their living in order to translate songs sometimes and put up the lyrics and interpret things that they're hearing, this is a challenge sometimes.
Yeah, changing music into a different language is a huge challenge because of, like we were talking about before, some languages are very musical, they flow very well. Maybe a lot of the syllables end in ah or o, and they work out very well. In another language, everything is very abrupt and sharp, and it's not going to work in the same way at all. It could be the same words and the same meaning, but in a different language, it can completely throw off the flow and the style. So it would be very important to be extremely familiar with the destination language as well as the source language, so that you can find other ways to say things to make it fit into the music better.
To get that context in there in the translation.
Otherwise, it just sounds like it would sound more like you just threw it into Google Translate and then like slapped it over the music. And stuff. Okay, we're done, and you walk away.
And let AI take over.
Exactly.
So we're gonna. I learned a new word for this one: contrafactum. Nice. And that's what he's going to be talking about here. And it's part of the reason why song translations usually suck.
Indeed.
Today's guest video is a little different from normal, so be prepared for music, emoji, and being told you're hot as Alex from Play the Mind takes on song translations. Alex, take it away.
Give your heart and soul to me, and life will always be la vie en rose. You just heard a contrafactum. That's when the lyrics of a song are changed, but the music stays the same. Parody songs are a good example of contrafactum, and so are song translations. But as opposed to parodies, song translations give the false impression of remaining faithful to the original. For instance, what I just sang is part of the English version of the French song La Vie en Rose by Edith Piaf. The French lyrics of what I sang are Et dès que je t'aperçois, alors je sens en moi mon cœur qui bat. The meaning of these words has nothing to do with what I just sang. As a matter of fact, the whole English version ends up becoming short, bilingual, gender-neutral, and sung directly to the loved one, which are characteristics not present in the original French version. And this song isn't the only case where this happens. When dealing with any song translation, there's a conflict between the meaning of the lyrics and the way they sound when spoken. If you were to translate a song purely based on meaning, you would end up having lyrics with beats falling on syllables which naturally don't receive an accent when spoken. So somewhere you need to sacrifice meaning in order to preserve good sound. And who's to blame for making song translations so darn complicated? It's phonology. The phonology of a language is like its musical DNA, and it has a primordial influence on how the melody of a song gets written in a certain language. Even the particular way a baby cries has to do with how its mother speaks. There's two things to consider in phonology. The phonemes are the vowels and consonants that make up speech, and the prosody of a language is the way the phonemes are put together into syllables, words, and sentences, and their intonation in order to convey meaning. It's the prosody of English that makes a difference between saying, "Hey, you're hot," and saying, "Hey, you're hot." But back to music. It's the phonological system of a language which shapes the melody of a song originally written in that language. And when translating that song into a language with a completely different phonological system, something ends up sounding bad. For instance, some languages like Hindi or Italian are more favorable to melismatic singing, where you have multiple notes sung over just a few vowels. Here's an example in English. If I should stay. That was Whitney Houston. And other languages, such as German or Polish, are more favorable to syllabic singing, where you have one note per syllable. Freude schöner Götter Funken Tochter aus Elysium. That was Ludwig van. Gesundheit. Oh. Therein lies the crux of the matter. Setting the text of a syllabic language to a melismatic song, or vice versa, sounds forced, artificial. I'm fully aware that no language is purely syllabic or purely melismatic, but I'm emphasizing these extremes in order to drive my point home. A song translation can either sound good but be inaccurate in meaning, or it can be accurate but sound bad. Take your pick. But how important are song translations nowadays? Well, think of this. Roughly 80 million people speak Korean worldwide, yet to this day, the video on YouTube with most views is the Korean song Gangnam Style with more than 2.5 billion views. This means most of the audience probably didn't understand a word that was being sung.
Go subscribe to Play the Mind for all sorts of videos about music theory and acoustics, including one about the very first mic drop. Next time, in the last guest video of the run, we have something in the ever-popular genre of That Thing You're Eating Isn't What You Think It Is. See you then.
Oh, I want to know what I'm eating.
It's always good to know what you're eating.
And hey, you're hot. You said so.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I've got my Ritz cracker box here, so I can cool down.
Well, he touched on some of that syllabic challenge with different languages. I hadn't thought about that with the German. It is all like the syllables hit on each note like that.
Absolutely. And that's where something like when there's like somebody has in the middle of their song, they have a rap break or whatever, something where it's just very timed out like that. German would be perfect for that, because it is very machine gun fire when it comes to that one syllable per beat.
Yeah, I think I'd have an easier time writing like lyrics for German than I would for like French or Italian, where you got to get a little fancier with the melody.
Yeah. And as you said, I mean, those languages also, there's a lot of ways you can, all languages, there's a lot of ways you can say things, but all of the ways that you could say things in French and Italian sound great, in terms of like, you hear, like to most ears, like it just sounds very musical in the way it flows.
And the ladies like how it sounds.
Absolutely.
So that was at Tom Scott Go over on YouTube. Monster Force on YouTube. 6.44 million subscribers. Nice. Wicked accomplishment, Tom. Yeah, he's got multiple channels all over, and like this one is more of a science channel, but does go into languages and all sorts of cool topics like we cover. So Tom, you are the coolest freshie channel I found this week.
Nice. And science is my language for sure.
Yeah, and he did actually make it in twice, because he's tied with 12 Tone, and
right.
This one kind of covers the other side of it when it comes to, here is an actual language that was designed based on music. This was the one that I was talking about with Francois Suder, and he came up with his own language. What did he call it? Salrisol, and it is based off of the 7-note staff.
Nice. I am intrigued.
And this is coming from the same YouTube at Tom Scott Go. And let's see how a language for music is designed.
For the first time ever, this week's guest video uses art and animation. 12-Tone is a channel about music theory that uses pen and paper and piano notes and doodles of elephants. But today, they are also talking about language. 12-Tone?
Hey, welcome to 12-Tone, or to put that another way. Okay, that may have sounded like a nice but strange melody, but it was actually a sentence in La Langue Musicale Universelle, or the Universal Musical Language, also known as Solresol. Solresol was invented in the mid-19th century by a French musician named Jean-François Sudre, who'd become fascinated with the idea of a language made of music. His first attempt, which he called La Téléphonie, was fairly straightforward. He just took the French alphabet and assigned each letter to a musical note. This wasn't really a new language, though. It was more like a code, and it found its home where most codes do, the military. Sudre tried to sell his system to the French army and later the Navy, but despite early interest, they never actually paid him for it. He even built a series of properly tuned cannons in order to increase the volume of his transmissions, but to no avail. Still though, he wasn't about to give up on his dream. Instead, he set his sight on an even more ambitious task, a universal second language. His goal was to create a language that was bound to no particular country, one that every person learned in addition to their native tongue, allowing free communication across cultural borders. But just converting French into a musical code wasn't good enough for that. Sudre was going to have to invent a real language. To do this, he turned to a system of musical notation known as solfege. This is that do-re-mi stuff Julie Andrews was singing about. Well, almost. In The Sound of Music, the notes are do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, which is the English method, but most other countries in Europe use si instead, and since Sudre was French, that's what he did. Anyway, having so few possible syllables presents a fairly obvious problem. In English, it's hard to even guess how many single-syllable words there are, but one estimate I found puts it at roughly 7,000. Solresol, on the other hand, has 7. These are reserved for only the most basic elements of communication like yes, no, and the. 2-syllable words aren't much better. There's 49 possible combinations used for things like pronouns, greetings, and common descriptors like good and bad. They're also used for conjugation. Solresol can't fit a bunch of different words for each verb, so instead it has one verb form, the present, and then just uses a set of 2-syllable words to tell you about the tense. But where things get really interesting are the larger words, which have the room to build in some structures. 3-syllable words are loosely divided into groups of 6 based on the first 2 notes. Words starting with sol-si are based on fun and games, including run, laugh, and smile. Words starting with re-la, on the other hand, are negative traits like misanthropy, distrust, and intolerance. At 4 syllables, he takes this concept to a whole new level, breaking all the words up into 7 groups called keys based on their first syllable. The key of do, for instance, is all about humanity, including the body, mind, and spirit. The key of re is for words about the household and family. Mi is for actions and flaws, fa is for travel and war, sol is for art and science, la is for industry, and si is for government. There's also a second set of keys that come up when your word includes a note repeated twice in a row, although their meanings are usually related to the main key. And that's it. Sudre's language only went up to 4 syllables with less than 3,000 total words. The 5th syllable was left open for future development in case new words were needed, but by carefully removing things like synonyms, tense, and parts of speech, which are managed exclusively through accents rather than new words, he managed to squeeze quite a lot of meaning into just those 3,000. Sadly, while Sudre's work made him famous, at least in certain circles, it never repaid him for the time and money he put into it. To quote the writer Paul Collins, Solresol is at heart the philanthropic effort of an idealist, and the brotherhood of mankind does not issue quarterly dividend checks. After Sudre's death, though, his wife Josephine took up the cause, and the language started to pick up steam, with thousands of speakers and a society for its preservation founded in Paris, culminating in 1902 with the publication of a guide to its grammar by the head of the society, Boleslas Gajewski. But the dream of a true universal language was fading, so preservationists focused on another of Sudre's selling points, accessibility. You see, Solresol doesn't actually have to be based on music. It's got 7 characters and can be grafted onto any set of 7 items, like the 7 colors of the rainbow, or more importantly, 7 specific hand gestures. This meant that anyone who knew the spoken language could easily learn it as a sign language as well, making it an incredibly useful tool in communicating with deaf people. Gajewski's guide emphasized this possibility, but there was a problem. At the time, deaf education in Europe was dominated by a philosophy called oralism, which is basically the idea that deaf people should still learn to speak and that teaching them sign languages got in the way. To be clear, this is no longer considered a reasonable approach, but for Gajewski, it meant that the language he loved was cut off from the people it could help the most. So who knows, maybe if turn-of-the-century educators in France had been a bit more forward-thinking, we'd all be speaking in notes right now. Probably not. But maybe.
12 Tone, go subscribe to them for more videos like that one. I would recommend starting with their video about the Imperial March from Star Wars. Next week, the last guest video, which features a Canadian.
Oh, and like Tom said, subscribe to 12 Tone and also subscribe to @TomScott.
Yep.
Go over on YouTube because those are both great resources.
Absolutely. Very interesting.
You know what that got me thinking of? I wish that Gene Roddenberry, when he wrote Star Trek and they introduced the Universal Translator, I wish they had given some background on how they would have developed something like that, because I feel like if Gene had plucked from some of these ideas that he had there, that could possibly be a future universal translator in approach.
I'm also thinking just in general, AI has gotten to the point where we're pretty much on the cusp where you could really do real-time language translation when you have enough context in the model already. And that's where right now the models that are dealing with, such large amounts of data, they are trained on such large data sets that they should be able to, figure out what you mean in context and be able to translate that very faithfully into another language. Even when the languages don't have a lot of things in common, you can still get that same gist across in a different language.
And that's the real key to translation, is getting the gist across, because Google with their translator, it's gotten better and better, and it's amazing to see it as it's been developed over the years, but it still does run into that challenge of context. Not all languages play nice with each other in context approach, and a language like this might be the bridge to take context from one language and bridge it so that the context stays in the translation.
Some additional complexity can be thrown in, even just from some languages actually use whether the tone that you're actually speaking in rises or falls or stays steady in this, throughout. So if you say the word, ma is different than ma, which is different than ma, like all of those means have been completely different in certain languages, even though
if you're talking like Mandarin or the more complex Chinese languages, there's like 12 different mas and they all mean different things.
Exactly. And another one would be something like kind of the other side of that would be Eskimos having, however many words for snow. I think it was, literally dozens of different words for snow, because it depends whether it's the snow that just fell or whether it's the snow that's crunchy because it sat there and got rained on. Like each of the different types of snow have a very distinct name. Whereas, we would just say, oh, snow or wet snow or packed snow or whatever. We still use that same word snow, but for them, they use something different for all of them. So
I would
a lot of different complexities there.
I would speak in Game of Thrones. Winter is coming.
Winter is here.
That's how I say snow now.
There you go.
And hey, the king, his name was Jon Snow. So
perfect.
Yeah. So @TomScott Go, thank you for the double header tonight. That was some great information there.
Indeed.
And another freshie that I found, Kevin Abroad. What I liked about this one is he's going to get into the benefits of how music and language really can benefit your creative brain, your brain development, and it's good to focus and do these things because they will help you on both sides. You can learn to be a better communicator being a musician, and you can learn to be a better musician being a good communicator.
Absolutely. They do dovetail together.
This one's coming from at Kevin Abroad over on YouTube. Oh, he's been working it too. 8.85 subscribers.
Nice. Very cool.
And let's get this one loaded.
Just like
that. Let's see the 7 benefits of music and language learning.
Hello everyone, so today we are going to talk about music in the context of language learning. I'm actually surprised I didn't talk about music on my channel so far because I'm actually a big fan of music, and in fact one of my hobbies is singing. But for some reason I didn't, so I'm hoping that today I can make up for that. In this video, I will be making about 7 points on how music can be actually very beneficial for you in terms of language learning. The first point is that if you're not really big on reading, or maybe you have dyslexia like some of my students, then it's a great way to avoid reading because reading and writing is almost everywhere. But if you use music, then it's a nice way to counter this. And if you enjoy singing like me, then it's a nice way to practice pronunciation, and also while you're listening to music, you can also practice your listening skills. And in fact, it's even better if you're good at learning lyrics. Number 2, music, generally speaking, is enjoyable and is quite helpful to make you feel relaxed. And feeling relaxed is actually quite important. There's a linguist called Krashen, who in 1992 coined the phrase affective filter hypothesis. And this concept is basically saying that when you relax or in a more chilled or nice positive atmosphere, then your learning experience is all the better. And music can also be very motivating because it's something you can do with your friends, maybe if you go to karaoke. Or maybe, just like me, you go to karaoke to make fun of people. Number 3, music is a nice way to be exposed to the culture of the language you're learning, the target language, or TL. And also, it's a nice way to learn slang, because when you're learning a language, especially at the beginning, you usually, have the main phrases, the very formal language. It's not really natural even sometimes, it's always quite formal. So having music is a nice way to, be aware of the slang and having a more real relationship with the language, if I may say. Number 4, I think music is also a nice way to practice vocabulary, grammar, and sentence structure, because when you listen to music, obviously there's a lot of repetition. Even if you listen to the song once, just the chorus will be repeated maybe 3 or 4 times. So just that is actually very helpful to remember the vocab because it's repeated quite a lot of times, and also it's nicer than just someone repeating words to you because you also have the melody with it. And again, if you sing it, you're also physically involving yourself in the learning because you're actually moving. Singing is a movement, and it's quite good for kinesthetic learners, so people that kind of learn better with movement or actually using their body. Number 5, and this one is actually very interesting, is that music has a great impact on memory. In 2000, Fonseca Mora actually found that the connection you have with music on an emotional level is actually something that has, a positive impact on memory because you get attached to the activity. And this emotional connection is believed to be the reason why we sometimes can learn words of songs so easily. Wallace, in 1994, also concluded that sung texts as opposed to spoken texts are usually more easily remembered. And another good thing is that usually you don't actively learn songs. Most of the time, you just learn them sort of naturally without actually meaning to. And you can imagine how that can be quite powerful and useful for language learning. And number 6, I can bet that most of you have experienced this feeling when you get a song stuck in your head and you can't help but singing on and on and on and on. Well, this is what linguist Salcedo called musical din. And this is very powerful because when you're singing a song in a foreign language, then it's actually easy practice for you and effortless because you're just repeating words on and on and on, and these words get stuck in your mind, and then you can hopefully remember these words or grammar structures or sentence structures easily without making any effort. And this is very useful because it means you are practicing a language without actually meaning to. Number 7, and this is probably the most important point in my video, is that music is, generally speaking, a fun activity. anyone can use music. There's tons and tons of music, especially nowadays with Spotify and YouTube and all these sort of services. So anyone can access different styles of music. So no one can really say I don't like music, because there's something for everyone, I guess. And because it's so much fun, it actually helps you keep motivated. And we all know that in language learning, motivation kind of goes up and down and sometimes actually kind of vanishes. But music can actually help you retain that motivation high. And also, as I said before, it's a nice way to learn about the culture. And, I really much enjoy looking for music and new singers, new artists, because it's actually interesting in general. I don't know. I mean, I hope you agree with that. Anyway, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you found these tips useful, and that if you didn't believe in music, now you do. I will soon do a video about apps that use music to learn languages, so keep an eye out for them on my channel, and I will see you later. Bye!
Oh, I do believe in music, Kevin. And I love those points he made there. At Kevin Abroad over on YouTube. It's all about language and culture. That's a cool channel. That's a cool channel. And he does like to emphasize the making it fun. You see that with his first video suggestion.
Absolutely. Got to make it fun. Got to have it in there. Kevin Abroad. Much appreciated.
Yeah, I like his interpretation of the benefits, and it also benefits you in your health. If you are doing things that are fun, enjoyable, you're keeping your brain going and creative. It makes for a healthier person in general.
Definitely. And one thing about doing things like music, focusing on things like that, there's ways to get into like a flow state. And one of the ways to do that is, like he was talking about, the being very relaxed and being in that kind of a state. And some people call it a flow state, where just everything seems to come easier to you. You're able to absorb and retain information better. Sometimes it's music that can set you into that mode. Sometimes just planning something in the future can actually get your mind into that mode where you're feeling more receptive, or you're feeling more energized to, focus on a creative endeavor like that. So it's just really about, kind of, psyching yourself up into it when you want to get motivated like that.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, when it comes to like child development and the benefits that you can get here, the repetition that he mentions in there, as a child's first learning, language and communication, repetition becomes somewhat important in that development, and music makes it easy.
Do you remember the cow goes moo?
And the dog goes bark.
Exactly.
I had multiple versions of that toy.
I was going to say, you probably had the French one, right? How does le cow go?
La moo.
That would have been my guess. I thought Lemieux was a hockey player.
He actually is. Canadians.
Indeed.
So, at Kevin Abroad, language and culture. If you're interested, visit his YouTube.
Nice.
So for our last video, another freshie this week, Jack Rouche. I'm gonna say Rouche, the French in me. And why I really wanted to get this one in here is because this kind of ties more to a little bit of music theory. He's going to discuss utilizing language to help improve with your soloing, and to think of your notes and your solos in a syllabolic way.
Yep.
That's coming from at Jack Rouche. I hope I'm saying it right. Weekly guitar lessons, specializing in blues and jazz. I should have been checking this out during the WAG contest. My first round was jazz, and my third round was blues.
Nice. 3 rounds. Well done.
If I go into this contest again, I will be back, Jack, for those.
Nice.
But here we're going to learn the language of music, and for him, with his description, he does see it as a language with the approach he's taking.
Well, check it out. And again, it all depends. There's vocabulary, there's syntax, there are parallels, like we said before, with language, and we'll see which ones he likes.
Well, and me, I need to improve my soloing, so like this information's always useful.
Indeed.
If you've watched this channel before, you know that I spend a lot of time explaining music theory and break down the fretboard using things like scales, arpeggios, and triads. Now, don't get me wrong, these are super powerful tools for understanding music and becoming a more well-rounded guitar player. But that's not what I actually think about when I'm playing. You see, music is like a language, and learning the notes is like learning the letters of the alphabet. Learning the rules of music theory is very much like learning the rules of grammar. But when it comes time to actually talk, we don't think about spelling or grammar. We think about vocabulary, phrases and expressions that help you express your thoughts and feelings. And that vocabulary is exactly what I'm hearing when I'm improvising through a solo. So if you've ever tried to learn a second language, you'll know that there's really kind of two different approaches. You can get a tutor, take classes, get books, and kind of go the academic route. Or you can immerse yourself around people that speak that language and pick it up by ear by hearing the language spoken in the context of daily life. And music is really no different than that. Right? Taking private lessons, watching online tutorials is a great way to cover the academic side of things. But I believe you really need a combination of these two learning approaches to become a well-rounded musician. Now, if you want to immerse yourself in music and pick it up by ear, some great ways to do that are by listening to a lot of records, transcribing things by ear, also going to live performances and seeing great musicians perform firsthand. And then, of course, also performing and playing with other musicians, especially musicians that are going to challenge you and push you. If you combine these things with a basic fundamental knowledge of theory and the fretboard, really the sky is the limit. I play every day when I pick up the guitar is vocabulary that I've transcribed. Things that I've picked up from other musicians and incorporated into my own playing. This is how I've learned so many of the things that I know about music, from listening to and analyzing the work of other musicians. Now, sometimes it takes me a while to understand the theory behind some of these things that I learn. But by understanding the context of the song, the underlying chord progression, I can see where this vocabulary fits in and I can start to use it. Then by having a basic understanding of music theory and how the fretboard breaks down, I can start to analyze this stuff and figure out what's really going on. This allows me to then expand on it, reorganize it, spread it around the fretboard, and start to make this vocabulary my own. All right, so here's an example of something I recently transcribed, a little piece of vocabulary that I've added to my own playing. And I'll show you a little bit about how I would analyze this and start to incorporate it and make it my own thing. This is something I heard my friend Pat Bergeson play at a recent gig. Pat is a phenomenal jazz guitar player, if you're not familiar with him. But this was over a swing blues in the key of F. And this lick happens over sort of the 6-2-5-1 part of the progression, So from F to D7, G minor, to C7 and back to 1. So understanding the context of where this lick happens. What is the underlying harmony? What's the chord progression? What's section of the form is it in? That's really the most important first step, because that's going to really help you when it comes time to analyze it and figure out what's going on in the lick. So the next step, once you sort of have the form and the context, is just simply learning what was played. So in this case, it's this. Right, so a really beautiful line, kind of a bebop style line that outlines those chords. So now you can take a deeper look at it and start to figure out what exactly is going on in this lick. And it starts over the F7 chord, and we're highlighting, you know, the third of that chord. It starts on the chord and then it does sort of a little trill that goes back to that third. And then right here, we're targeting the third of that D7 chord. So that's where the chord change happens. And then again, sort of doing a little chromatic enclosure that's targeting the root of that D7 chord. So. And then here we're kind of switching over to our G minor and targeting chord tones of that G minor. Right, there's the minor third of G minor and there's the root. Right, and then sort of a little chromatic bluesy thing. Right, to target the root of the C chord. And then we're back to our F7. Right, so now that I know what's played and I can kind of see how it fits over the context of the chords, sort of how it overlays over that backdrop, what the harmony is, then I can start taking it and moving it around. If I know the different positions on the fretboard, I can move that same lick around in different spots. I could play it down here. Right, and move it around to all the different positions and different string sets, and start playing it in different keys and all of those things that come with having a good grasp of the fretboard. But then I can also take the concepts, if I understand the theory behind it, you know, what chord tones are being targeted, little things like chromatic movements that are being used. I can start to kind of break that apart and incorporate it with other things that I know that are similar, or just take those concepts and elaborate them on them and reorganize them. So I could take the opening part of this lick, and then from here maybe go in a slightly different direction. Right, and then maybe something like that. So that's a nice line. Right, or I could do something like, right, so just taking these concepts, these ideas of targeting chord tones, using chromatic enclosures and little things like that, and taking this basic vocabulary and phrasing and using that as a jumping off point to create vocabulary of my own. So, you know, this is a huge part of how I play guitar and how I, you know, find my own ideas and concepts to play on the instrument. All right, thank you for joining me here on my channel and for watching this video. For more lesson content, check out my Patreon page and look down in the description for all the links to my different courses. As always, happy practicing, take care, and I will catch you next time.
Oh, he was singing with that guitar.
Absolutely. Great tone. Reminded me of a little bit of like a Schofield line early on, like what he was playing. And I really do like the fact, like when they talk about soloing approaches and a chord progression, like he was talking about, there's multiple ways you could look at it. What kind of scale or thing fits all of those chords, and you could run one scale over the whole thing, or you treat each chord change as a separate event. One danger with doing it that way is a lot of times it just sounds like you're hitting, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 in this key, and then okay, it's going to change to the next chord, 1, 2, 3, 4 in that key. Like you don't want to just fall into a trap like that where you're just playing the same riff and just changing it to this key and then changing to that key and then changing to that key, because it sounds like that's what you're doing. What he was doing was much better, which is of course coming up with a very nice melody line that highlights the chord tones. And what he was talking about there, like talking about the third right as the chord change happens, that's big, because that is exactly where you want to be, because the bass
and then a little trill, like that's
exactly.
like speaking, that's like singing.
Yeah, and that's like the melismatic languages where you're where you're going up and down rather than just like just getting notes out there in machine gun fashion. But yeah, I've definitely liked the way that comes across like that. And again, finding that melody line that weaves its way through the different chord changes and highlighting the third of the chord that's about to change, but also highlighting what note is different in this chord than we were using before. Like if you're going from the 1 to the 6, you're using all the same notes. So you're just trying to emphasize or focus on that 6 and the fact that, the 3 of that 6 chord, that's where you're trying to target to kind of get that across. But then if you're going, to the 5, you're going to, use a different note. There's going to be another additional sharp. Like if you look at the 5 of C, C has no sharps and flats. The 5 is G. G has that one sharp. So you're adding a sharp in there and highlighting that note is where you'll really be able to feel that chord change, because that is the one note that we weren't using at all in the last chord. And now we're using it when we're going to the 5 chord. So you want to make sure you get that note in there, because that's the one that really gets that change to really feel like you changed.
So like depending on how you highlight in language, it's the difference between these pretzels are making me thirsty or these pretzels are making me thirsty.
And these pretzels are making me thirsty.
Yeah, it all makes sense now. Who would have known there was music theory in Seinfeld?
Oh, I did. There's music theory everywhere. But yes, good stuff. And I like the way it was all packaged there too.
I really like how he explained it. I like that tone as well. Beautiful guitar tone you have there, Jack. And I'm going to say it's Rush, just with the CH, Jack Rush, because that sounds cool.
I like.
I'll have to check. I'll go through some more videos and see if I can find out.
Very cool. And a good collection of stuff for today for talking about music as language. And I mean, like you said, it's a big category, so we're gonna have to come back and talk about it more again sometime in the future.
Yeah. This is one that will and different approaches to language. I would like to cover like singing in French, singing in Italian. And then I got an idea actually from the last video. I'd like to cover music and motion. We will have a night where we look at ballet and dance and how music and interpretive motion ties in with dance. I think that'll be a fun night.
Nice. I like it. And there are some musicians who actually incorporate dance into their routines as well, where it's part music and part dance, and it's all together.
Well, and the Kevin video when he was talking about like some people learn more motion wise that might tie into like some of that.
When we were talking about earlier also, how kids interact with music, and what jumped out at me is I got too much sun on Sunday when I was at a festival over here. We had a gig where I had to be there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it was overcast all morning. So I didn't realize that I was getting more sun than I realized, because it didn't get sunny until midday, and I was hiding from the sun at that point, but it was too late. But there was this one little kid who was just, I mean, he was into the music 100%. Like they were just walking past, and he just like, as just starts bouncing, like as soon as like they started a song, he starts bouncing, and the mom was, she was loving it. So she's like watching him and, just hanging out. They decided to stop and just watch the band. He hung out for like the next hour and a half, just bopping up and down. And literally everybody who walked past, you see them walk past, just, going about their day. They look over and see this kid, and they like nudge the person next to them, like, oh, look at this adorable kid over here. And they get these huge smiles on their face looking over at this kid, because this kid was into it.
You got a little musician there, Mom.
And it's just, seeing music hit somebody like that is one of those things. Like one of Ange's little screenshots is like some, little girl. She's just like, yeah, like the most triumphant pose ever. Like just, somebody else is just playing guitar on the sidewalk or whatever. But, when music hits you, it hits you,
Oh, and it's awesome to see those kids that it hits like that. They encourage me.
Yeah, exactly. And, I like to be one of those kids, like, I mean, I still can, look at the world with eyes of wonder sometimes and see the stuff like that. You hear something, you're just like, wow, how did he do that?
Yeah, I'm still 4 years old up here.
Exactly. Me too, in many ways.
But I'm drinking milk.
Yeah. And getting strong.
Yeah. And we'll be bigger next Thursday when we come back.
That's right.
Because we're grown.
When we come back with more of Talking IT with Glenn and Tony. Don't forget to join tomorrow also, Tatius, right?
Yeah. Band Lab plus coffee at 9.
Nice. And next week, Thursday. IT.
We'll be back.
We'll be back next week. Thanks, everybody.
You do it so much better. Night, everyone.
It's not a tumor.
Is it a tuba?
Ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can stretch. With this AI, like stretching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice. 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way.